Naraya Cole wasn't supposed to be home until Sunday, but the keynote at the Chicago Expo was cancelled, and for once, she didn't want to extend the trip. She didn't feel like smiling through one more industry brunch, shaking hands with developers who couldn't pronounce her name, or pretending the weight in her chest had nothing to do with what was happening back home. She didn't text, didn't call. She just took an earlier flight. It was raining in Los Angeles when she got in. The car ride was quiet, the kind of quiet that gives you time to notice things, like how tired your heart feels or how different. The air smells when you've been gone too long from a house that's supposed to be your home. She rolled her suitcase inside, kicked off her heels, and set her keys on the console. The lights were off. The hallway was dim. At first, she thought she was hearing the TV, then a laugh, then a moan, then her own voice in her head saying, "No, you're being paranoid." But then she saw it. The robe, her robe. Cream silk with a thin wine-colored trim. The one she had custom-made in Italy. The same one she gave Aminda last year for her birthday. It was on the floor of her bedroom. Crumpled, open, still warm, like someone had just dropped it. She stepped forward. The door was slightly ajar. The sheets on her bed were twisted. The scent of perfume, not hers, hung in the air. Then the woman in the bed turned. It was Aminda, her best friend, her closest sister, her confidant, pregnant, her stomach round, her skin flushed, and beside her, Ellis, shirtless, frozen, mouth half open, not a word coming out. Naraya didn't scream. She didn't cry. She walked to the nightstand, picked up her Cartier watch, fastened the band calmly, then looked up once. Just once. Then she said, "You had every choice in the world, and you chose her. That's all I needed to know." And then she walked out. No yelling, no name-calling, no tears, just silence, the kind that follows you for years. Welcome back to Mr. Charles Stories. This story isn't about drama. It's not even about cheating. It's about betrayal with a smile. It's about the people who knew your pain and still caused more. It's about what happens when a woman who's been counted out realizes she's the one doing the counting now. Tap like, hit subscribe. Because what Naraya did next, that's the part no one saw coming. Naraya Cole didn't grow up with money. She didn't come from the hills of Beverly or the skylines of Manhattan. She came from a single-level home in Baldwin Hills, raised by her mother, a retired schoolteacher who always made dinner from scratch, who still ironed her sheets, and who believed in three things: work with your hands, protect your name, and never lose yourself to love. By the time Naraya was 8, she could diagram a floor plan. By 15, she was building scale models out of cardboard and paint sticks, and by 26, she'd passed up jobs with big firms because she wanted her own. She didn't want a desk. She wanted her name on the door. Cole Concept started in a shared workspace with 2 interns and a folding table. She built that firm blueprint by blueprint, learning which investors didn't take her seriously and which clients thought her quiet tone meant she lacked edge. But she kept going, kept delivering, until one summer evening, she got invited to speak on a panel hosted by a luxury real estate group in downtown LA. That's where she met him, Ellis Monroe, founder of Monroe Development Group, one of the youngest black billionaires in California, polished, decisive, magnetic, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to make you listen. He didn't approach her right away. He waited until after the event, slipped her his card like it was casual. "I've seen your portfolio," he said. "If you're ever ready to scale, I'd like to help." She didn't call him back for 2 weeks. It wasn't until one of her contracts fell through, because the city rejected zoning plans, that she remembered what he'd said. They met at a small cafe. No suit, no sales pitch. He let her speak, asked smart questions, then said, "You've built something rare. I'm not trying to buy it. I'm asking how I can help you grow it." The first thing he gave her wasn't funding. It was attention. And Naraya, who had never relied on charm or speed, found herself pulled in. Not fast, but deeply. Their courtship was like everything else she valued. Measured, mature, real. No love bombing, no flowers every hour. Just consistent presence. Calls when he said he'd call. Meetings that started and ended on time. Respect that didn't have to be earned. He didn't treat her like someone he had to rescue. He treated her like someone he wanted to build with. It was a different kind of love. By the end of the first year, they had quietly moved in together. No Instagram announcement, no big reveal, just two grown people in love, choosing to share the same space. Her firm expanded. His portfolio doubled. And somewhere between long walks at night and quiet Sunday mornings, he asked her to marry him. No flash mob, no candlelit rooftop, just him, kneeling in the kitchen, holding a ring and saying, "You don't need me, but I need this life with you." And she said yes, because back then, she believed him. The wedding was small, intimate, held in a secluded courtyard in Topanga Canyon, surrounded by wildflowers and soft jazz, not influencers or paparazzi. It wasn't about the show, it was about the promise. Nerea wore a champagne-colored gown with no train. Ellis wore a charcoal suit with no tie. They stood under a hand-carved arch, said their vows, and kissed without applause. The whole ceremony lasted under 20 minutes, but the way Ellis looked at her made it feel like time had paused. Everyone called them powerful. He, the mogul with commercial empires. She, the visionary with lines that turned into living beauty. But Nerea never chased the power couple label. She chased purpose, legacy. In their home, business talk lived in the kitchen, and bedroom ideas lived on paper. They supported each other's wins, challenged each other's limits, and when things got hard, they didn't walk away. They adjusted. At least, that's what she believed. Because for the first 3 years, it worked. They took evening walks barefoot around their lawn. Cooked on Thursdays, always pasta, no phones. Took weekend trips to Palm Springs without ever sharing a single picture. To the world, they were stunning. To themselves, they were steady. And then came the longing. It started as a whisper between them. Maybe it's time. A child. Nerea had always known she wanted to be a mother. But she'd waited, chosen stability, chosen to build. So when her period didn't come 1 month, she smiled with quiet hope. Then came the pain, a miscarriage, 6 weeks in. Then silence, then whispers again. We'll try again. Next time will be different. They tried again, and again. Blood work, temperature tracking, IVF consultations. The second miscarriage hurt more. Not because of the loss, but because of the loneliness. Ellis stayed calm, supportive, too supportive. She remembered sitting in their bathroom at 2 a.m., holding her knees, eyes swollen shut, and Ellis, he was in the hallway, on the phone, whispering something. She'd asked him the next morning who it was. "Just work," he said. She didn't believe him. But she didn't ask again. Instead, she threw herself into design work, spending long hours sketching buildings she hadn't been hired to create, walking through empty lots dreaming of schools, gardens, and libraries. One night, Aminda stopped by with ice cream and a bottle of wine. "Girl," she said, "you don't have to act like you're made of steel. Talk to me." And Nerea did. She told her everything, about the second loss, about the way Ellis had become distant, about the pain of being unable to give the man she loved the one thing they dreamed of together. Aminda had held her, rubbed her back, told her she was the strongest woman she knew. She'd left her that night with a promise. "You'll be a mother. I feel it. Don't give up." Nerea believed her, because Aminda wasn't just a friend. She was family, the kind of family that knew your story better than your siblings, the kind you kept close without ever questioning if you should. She never imagined that while she grieved the loss of her own pregnancy, Aminda was carrying Ellis's child. It felt like a punch in a place no one could see, because betrayal by a stranger stings. But betrayal by someone you loved through breakups, broke college nights, and birthday surprises, that doesn't sting. It mutilates. It hadn't always been that way. Nerea had met Aminda during freshman orientation at Howard. She wore platform heels, gold hoops, and a red halter top, and she had the kind of laugh that turned heads and made professors groan. Aminda was untamed, loud, soft-hearted but quick to fight. Where Nerea read quietly in the quad, Aminda danced on benches. Where Nerea submitted every assignment 2 days early, Aminda bribed her way into extensions with banana muffins. And yet, they clicked. Opposites, but unbreakable. Through college heartbreaks, internship flops, unpaid rent, and family drama, they stayed by each other's side. They weren't just friends. They were chosen family. Aminda stood next to Nerea when she opened her first office, held her bouquet on her wedding day, cried when Nerea lost her second baby. So how? How could someone so close do something so intimate, so cruel? Nerea would ask herself that question 1,000 times in the coming months. But the answer never came, because Aminda never gave it. No apology, no justification, just silence, like it never happened. And Ellis, he was the one who introduced the distance. But Nerea, she'd built the wall. It started quietly, sleeping on the guest bed under the guise of work, missing dinners, showing up late to Sunday brunches, avoiding eye contact when he asked, "You okay?" She wasn't okay. She was grieving a baby that never lived, a marriage that was starting to feel edited. And still, she stayed. Until the night before the Chicago trip. Ellis had leaned across the table and said, "I know this trip will be good for you. Clear your head. Reset." He'd kissed her forehead, and she remembered feeling a flicker in her chest. She didn't know if it was love, or if it was her body warning her, this is not your forever anymore. She still packed her bag, still boarded the flight, still planned to come home Sunday, to a man she loved, to a life she was trying to save. But fate had other plans. The keynote got cancelled. She came home early and walked in on the truth. Aminda Reyes had always been fire and laughter. She was the first to suggest shots at brunch, the one who cried at every movie, and the friend who always remembered birthdays down to the gift wrapping. She lived big, loved hard, and never apologized for her chaos. People either adored her or stayed far away. Nerea had always done the former. They met at 18. A hallway accident during orientation led to Aminda spilling coffee on Nerea's white blouse. Instead of apologizing like most people would, Aminda had smiled wide and said, "Guess that's how fate tells us we're meant to be friends." And they were, roommates for 3 years. CO survivors of failed relationships, each other's first call when the world went dark or wild. Where Nerea was poised and careful, Aminda was impulse and instinct. She didn't follow rules. She made them. And yet, somehow, she always made Nerea feel seen, until she didn't. Aminda was the first person Nerea called after her first pregnancy test. She was the one who came over with vitamins, belly oil, and a list of midwives. She even bought Nerea a onesie that read, "Future Architect." The night Nerea lost that pregnancy, Aminda showed up with soup, silence, and sleepover clothes. They slept in the same bed. Nerea cried until her body gave out. Aminda held her like a sister. That kind of intimacy doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from trust, from history, from the belief that some people are forever. That's what made the betrayal unbearable. Because Ellis's betrayal was flesh, but Aminda's, it was soul. Nerea had told her everything. The IVF injections, the hormone changes, the way she felt like a failure every time her body didn't hold the baby. And Aminda had comforted her, had looked her in the eyes and said, "That man's lucky to have you. Don't let this make you think you're not enough." That line replayed in Nerea's head every night in Atlanta, over tea, in the shower, in the silence of her own thoughts. She wondered when it started. Was it during one of those weekends Nerea was away at design summits? Was it when Aminda stayed late for wine nights and Ellis walked her to her car? Or had it started before then, when Nerea was too emotionally broken to see the shift in her best friend's eyes? She thought back to subtle signs. How Aminda started dressing slightly more polished when she visited. How she stopped making jokes about Ellis's stiff personality. How she'd linger in the kitchen just a bit longer when Ellis came home from work. Naraya had noticed, but she'd never questioned it. Because questioning it meant doubting someone she called sister. And family doesn't do that until they have to. The worst part wasn't the robe on the floor, or the way Ellis couldn't form words, or even the unmistakable curve of Aminda's stomach. It was the expression on Aminda's face. No panic, no shame, just silence, like she'd been caught stealing snacks, not sleeping with someone's husband. That look said everything, that she had made peace with her choice, that she didn't expect forgiveness, and that she probably didn't want it. Naraya walked out that day and never looked back, but the memories clung to her like smoke. In the weeks that followed, Ellis tried everything. Texts, calls, emails, messages through mutual friends. A letter, handwritten, dropped at her office. She didn't open it, because the truth was already loud enough. It didn't need ink and paper. Aminda, on the other hand, said nothing. Not a call, not a text, not a word. And that hurt more than any explanation Ellis could have given. Because even liars know they've done wrong. But silence means they don't care if you understand, or hurt, or heal. Aminda's silence was a choice, and Naraya had no intention of begging for closure from someone who already decided she wasn't worth honesty. Still, at night, Naraya found herself replaying memories. How Aminda used to braid her hair during finals week. How they danced barefoot in their first apartment after graduation. How she screamed when Naraya said, "Ellis proposed," and how, months later, she toasted them at the wedding with these exact words. Some people wait their whole lives to find peace in another person. Naraya found hers. "I love you both." She had stood there, wearing a blush gown Naraya had picked out, smiling like the best friend she pretended to be. The deception ran deep. It wasn't one moment of betrayal. It was years of performance. And the realization of that cut Naraya in ways Ellis's infidelity never could. By the end of that month, Naraya packed everything that mattered. Clothes, her sketchbooks, her late mother's earrings, the key to her firm, Cole Concepts. She left the rest behind, not because she was defeated, but because she was done. Ellis had taken her trust. Aminda had taken her friendship. But neither of them would get her purpose. And that was worth starting over for. The first thing Naraya did when she got to her office that morning, after walking out of her own bedroom like a stranger, was turn off her phone. No texts, no calls, no explanations. She didn't want comfort, didn't want confrontation. She wanted silence. But silence didn't stay silent for long. It echoed. And in that echo, memories came back sharper than ever. The wine nights. That one evening, Ellis had been unusually quiet while pouring drinks for the three of them. Naraya had chalked it up to fatigue. But now, she wondered if it was guilt. The look Aminda gave him when she laughed too hard at a joke that wasn't funny. The time Aminda had mentioned that she felt more seen around men. Like Ellis, older, established, not soft like these startup boys. Naraya had dismissed it, brushed it off with the ease of a woman who thought she was secure. But now those moments played back with color she hadn't noticed before. They weren't innocent. They were the edges of something she hadn't dared to imagine. And she'd walked past every single one. Ellis had always made people comfortable. That was part of his genius. He had a way of making you feel like you were in on something. Like, you belonged to an inner circle. Even if it was just an illusion. But with Naraya, it had never been an illusion. Or so she believed. They built things together. Late nights sketching concepts. Trips to cities just to walk their architecture. He even helped fund the scholarship arm of her firm, encouraging minority students to study sustainable design. Their relationship was rooted in purpose. That's what made this betrayal so brutal. It wasn't lust. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a decision, an erosion, a full-scale violation of everything they'd built. And Aminda? She was worse, because she wasn't just the other woman. She was the one who knew where Nerea kept her emergency meds during IVF. She was the one who texted every test day, "How are you feeling today? Did it stick?" She was the one who sat on the floor with her when Nerea found out the second embryo hadn't made it. She wasn't a stranger. She was a witness, and she still crossed the line. That realization came fully when Nerea saw the robe. That cream silk robe with the burgundy trim had been a gift, selected, months in advance, hand-wrapped, and mailed with a handwritten note. "For all the ways you've held me together, even when I was falling apart." And there it was, crumpled on the floor, like a receipt, discarded after the transaction was done. That robe meant something to Nerea. It symbolized trust, sisterhood, gratitude. To Aminda, it had become lingerie. In the days that followed, Ellis's calls came in like waves, one after another, morning, midnight. Even while she was in meetings, she ignored them all. Then came the letter, handwritten, delivered by courier to her office door. The envelope was cream, no name, just her initials, NC. She stared at it for 5 minutes before sliding it into her drawer without opening it. She didn't need to read it. She knew what it said. "I made a mistake. It didn't mean anything. We weren't connecting. She came to me. It just happened." But it didn't just happen. A betrayal. This calculated doesn't just happen. It's planned, covered, repeated. And once you hide something long enough, it becomes its own story. She wasn't interested in his story anymore. Aminda never reached out. No message, no attempt, no fake apology. She vanished like a shadow that had done its work and moved on. Nerea learned later, from a mutual friend, that Aminda had moved into one of Ellis's properties on the west side, that she was 6 months pregnant, that Ellis had quietly resigned from 2 board positions, that they weren't hiding, but they weren't exactly public either, which meant only one thing. They were waiting for the storm to pass, waiting for Nerea to either blow up or bow out. She chose neither. She chose silence, because sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. Not for revenge, but for freedom. Her lawyer asked if she wanted to go after Ellis for breach of prenup. She said no. He asked again if she wanted to block access to the firm's financial holdings. Still no. She took what was hers, left what wasn't, and signed the divorce papers without a single change. The only thing she asked to keep, the original blueprints of Cole concepts, the hand-drawn ones Ellis helped fund when the firm was just an idea. She didn't want the house, didn't want the cars, didn't even want his name on anything they shared. She wanted the foundation she built. That was enough. After the final meeting with the lawyers, Nerea walked out of the glass. Tower in Century City, sunglasses on, spine straight, no entourage. And for the first time in months, she felt light, not happy, not healed, but light, like the lie had finally left the room. Have you ever trusted someone so fully, only to realize they were smiling while you bled? Have you ever shared your deepest wounds with someone, only to learn they were the ones cutting you? If you've ever been betrayed by the people closest to you, this story is yours. Drop a comment if you've ever had to walk away from a friendship that once felt like family. Tap like if you've ever been forced to start over, stronger. Subscribe if you believe silence can be power, because Nerea's story is just beginning. And what she builds next, they never saw it coming. The rain had started before the plane even left Chicago. It tapped against the airport windows like a soft warning, but Nerea didn't listen. She stood at gate C11 with her boarding pass clenched in one hand and her carry-on tucked tight under her arm. She hadn't planned to leave early. In fact, she'd packed for 4 days, blocked her calendar, and even booked a spa appointment for Sunday morning. But something about the trip had felt hollow. The keynote speaker cancelled at the last minute, which should have felt like a bonus, an extra free day in the city. But Nerea felt an ache in her chest she couldn't name. She could have stayed. She didn't. Instead, she switched to the last seat on an earlier flight, skipped dinner, and ignored The series of texts from her assistant reminding her of Monday's back-to-back meetings. She just wanted to be home, to sleep in her bed, to exhale. But what waited at home wasn't rest. It was truth, and it would meet her in silk sheets, still warm from betrayal. The plane touched down in Los Angeles just after 10 p.m. The sky was heavy with clouds, and the Uber pickup zone was quieter than usual. Neria sat in the back seat, the smell of eucalyptus lingering from the driver. His air freshener, her eyes fixed on the raindrops racing across the window. The driver tried to make small talk once or twice, something about the traffic on the 405, but she didn't respond. She just wanted to get home. By the time they pulled into her driveway, the house looked exactly as she'd left it. Dark, quiet, still. But what Neria didn't know was that her absence hadn't left a void. It had made room for something, or someone, else to fill it. She rolled her suitcase inside. No lights were on. She moved quietly, like a woman trying not to wake anyone. Except no one was supposed to be home. Ellis had said he had a late dinner with one of the board members. Aminda was supposedly out of town. It should have been an empty house. So why was the TV on upstairs? Neria paused by the staircase. She didn't call out, didn't ask, hello? She just stood still, listening. And what she heard first wasn't the TV. It was laughter. Then a low hum. Then something softer, a moan. She didn't want to believe it. Not yet. Not until the robe. It was cream, trimmed in deep burgundy. Custom. Imported. Special. The kind of gift you only give someone you love, or someone who knows every secret you've ever told. And it was lying there, on the floor, outside her bedroom. Her breath caught. She took one step, then another. She pushed the door slowly. The scent hit her first, floral, powdery, not hers. Then the light, soft, golden, flickering from the side lamp. Then the sheets, twisted, warm, and then the curve of a woman's back. Neria froze. The woman shifted, turning toward the open door. Aminda, eyes half-lidded, hair tousled, her round belly resting gently against her thighs as she sat up. And Ellis, he didn't even move. He just stared at Neria, like he didn't recognize her, like she was the intruder. Her voice didn't shake. She didn't ask questions. She didn't cry. She walked in, calm, deliberate, and reached for her Cartier watch on the nightstand. Fastened it. Then she looked at him, at both of them, once, just once. And she said, "You had every choice in the world. And you chose her. That's all I needed to know." Then she turned, walked out. No shouting, no breaking glass, no tears on her cheeks, only silence. But inside, her chest burned. Not from heartbreak, from clarity. She got back in the Uber. The driver asked if she'd forgotten something. She lied. "Wrong house," she said. And then she told him a new address, her office downtown. He didn't question it, just drove. And Neria sat in the back seat, her arms folded tightly across her body, staring out into the rain like she wasn't watching the world fall apart. She was watching herself finally wake up. Her assistant was still in the office when she arrived. There was a stack of design proposals on her desk and an untouched bottle of orange juice from the fridge. "You're back early," the assistant said, startled. "Is everything okay?" Neria nodded once. "Everything's clear," she said. And then she walked past her, straight into the private break room, sat on the worn leather couch, and let her body fall still. She didn't cry. Not yet. Because some pain doesn't show up as tears. It shows up as stillness, as breath caught in your throat, as the hollow thump in your chest that reminds you you've just been permanently altered. She sat there until the sun began to rise. Then she picked up her phone, not to call Ellis, not to text Aminda, but to email her lawyer. Subject, request for consultation. Her marriage was over, but her name, her future, that was just beginning. By Monday morning, the city had moved on. Cars filled the streets. Emails flooded her inbox. Investors, vendors, clients. None of them knew what happened in her home over the weekend, and Naraya liked it that way. She put on her sharpest blazer, tied her hair in a clean low bun, slipped on the same heels she wore the day she pitched her first six-figure contract, and she walked into her conference room like nothing had changed, but everything had. Inside her chest was a new kind of stillness, not numbness, control. Her body knew something her heart hadn't accepted yet, that she'd just been set free, not by choice, by force, and there was no going back. She didn't respond to Ellis's calls, not on Monday, not Tuesday, not even when he sent a courier to her office with flowers and a note that read, "Let's talk. Please." She had already talked. Her silence now was her boundary. She didn't need an explanation, she needed distance. On Wednesday, his lawyer reached out. They wanted a quiet process, said Ellis was prepared to settle quickly. No press, no headlines, no court. Naraya didn't argue. She didn't need his money. She had her name, and that was all she planned to take. The settlement meeting took place in a high-rise in Century City, a neutral location, polished wood floors, frosted glass walls, and a table that stretched too wide for the emotions inside it. Ellis sat at one end, alone. No Aminda. He wore a dark suit, no tie. His hands were folded tightly in front of him, like he was trying to hold himself together. Naraya sat across from him, not angry, not anxious, just ready. Her lawyer laid out the terms. She wanted the firm, all trademarks, all property rights, and the apartment in Atlanta she'd bought in her name before the wedding. Everything else? He could keep. There was a long pause. Ellis looked at her, his eyes searching. "That's all?" he asked quietly. She blinked once. "I built that firm before you. You just gave it wings. But the design, the vision, that's mine." He nodded slowly. But there was something in his eyes that looked like guilt dressed up as sadness. Too late. She signed the papers with a steady hand. No tears, no hesitation. Then she stood, gathered her bag, and walked out. Outside, the sun was bright, loud, too loud. But Naraya didn't flinch. She adjusted her sunglasses, loosened her bun, and took the first full breath she'd taken in weeks. Freedom was quiet. No parade, no confetti, just the simple, solid feeling of knowing. You survived the moment that was supposed to break you. That night, she stayed in a hotel on the east side. A small boutique spot. No room service, no champagne. Just white sheets, silence, and a window that overlooked the freeway. She lay there alone, one leg stretched across the bed, and let the silence swallow her. But this time, the silence didn't echo betrayal. It hummed with possibility. The next morning, she packed a single suitcase. She sent a message to her Atlanta property manager, confirm key drop, moving in permanently. Then she called her assistant. "I'm transferring my base," she said calmly. "The LA office will still run, but I need a fresh air system. Start scouting for a new Atlanta office space. Something grounded, local, near the belt line." The assistant paused, but didn't question it. She knew Naraya. When she shifted, it wasn't a reaction. It was a decision. By the weekend, Naraya was on a flight to Atlanta. No fanfare, no social post, just her, a sketchpad, her laptop, and a playlist she hadn't touched since college. The city greeted her like an old friend. Quiet streets, scattered trees, humid air that wrapped around her like a warm coat. She stepped into her apartment, still barely furnished, and exhaled. No one knew she was there. Not Ellis, not Aminda, not even her assistant. And for the first time in months, she didn't have to explain her movements. She was nobody's wife, nobody's friend, just Naraya, fully. Finally, she set her sketchpad on the kitchen island, opened to a blank page, and drew. Lines first. Then arches, then sunlit windows and layered brick. She didn't know what she was designing. Maybe it was a home, maybe it was a museum, maybe it was just her mind telling her, "You're not done, you're just beginning." And this time, she'd build for herself. Naraya didn't unpack everything that first week. Some boxes stayed sealed in the second bedroom, labeled wedding keepsakes in her old assistant's handwriting. She shoved them in the closet, closed the door, and didn't look back. She didn't need to sift through old vows, didn't need to see photos of a man who claimed to love her while loving someone else at the same time. What she needed was breath, space, work that didn't revolve around heartbreak. So she buried herself in design again. Every morning she brewed her own coffee, played instrumental jazz, and mapped out her next vision, a multi-use residential development near the Atlanta Beltline. Sustainable materials, community gardens, first-floor art spaces for local creators. It wasn't trendy, it was needed. And that mattered more to her now than legacy ever did. There was something different about Atlanta, not just the city, but how it received her. It didn't expect her to dress up her grief, didn't make her feel like she had to perform her healing. Here, she could walk through grocery stores in a hoodie and slippers without anyone asking for her husband. No eyes whispering, "Wasn't she married to Ellis Monroe?" No pity smiles from neighbors who'd heard what happened. Here, she was just a woman rebuilding her life. And that anonymity, it was a gift. She started taking long walks in the mornings, sometimes alone, sometimes with a podcast in her ears, sometimes just with silence. There was a rhythm to it: wake, stretch, sketch, walk, design, sleep, simple, free, no emotional messes to clean up, no man asking for second chances, no best friend to lie to her face, only the version of herself she was still getting to know. One day, during a walk through the old Fourth Ward, she passed a construction site, a new commercial space, 3 stories, tall windows, still raw. There was a sign posted on the fence, "Seeking tenant, priority to black women-owned enterprises." She stopped walking, stared at the sign, then looked up at the building. It was nothing special. Not yet. But the bones, the potential, it felt right. She took a photo, then called her assistant the moment she got home. Found our Atlanta space. Reach out. Make it happen. She didn't ask about the rent, didn't question the square footage. When something aligned, she moved. And this felt like alignment. That afternoon, she sat on her balcony with a pad of tracing paper and began sketching the interior layout from memory. Reception desk on the left, client lounge by the windows, open concept workspace with beams exposed. She didn't look up once for 2 hours. When she finally set her pencil down, the sun was lower, the streets buzzing. But her soul, it felt calm, not fixed, but calm. And after months of chaos, calm was holy. Later that week, she found the courage to open one of the boxes from LA, not the wedding box, just one labeled personal. Inside was a leather-bound journal she hadn't touched since her second miscarriage. She ran her hand across the cover, opened it. The first page had a quote she wrote after her first embryo failed. "If my body is a blueprint, grief is the red ink. But I will still draft something beautiful." She read that line 3 times, then smiled, small, but real, and whispered to herself, "You are." The building didn't look like much from the outside. Raw steel, drywall, stained plywood floors, dust in the air, thick enough to leave trails behind your steps. But Naria walked the site like she already owned it. Her heels tapped softly on concrete. Her mind moved faster than the contractor's words. They were still smoothing electrical plans. HVAC wasn't fully mapped yet. But she wasn't here for what was done. She was here for what could be. "Do you have a tenant in mind?" the site rep asked as she walked alongside him. Naria stopped mid-stride. She looked at the rough beams, the wide windows, the early bones of the space that would soon hold stories. Then said, without blinking, "Yes." "Me." He raised a brow. "Your firm?" "Cole Concepts." She nodded. "But not the one you've seen on paper." There was something fresh in her voice. Like this wasn't a restart, it was an evolution. By Friday, she signed the lease. A 10-year agreement, modest price, full creative control of the space design. She didn't even flinch. She called her team on Zoom from her empty apartment that night. Half the LA staff looked surprised. The other half looked relieved. Everyone knew she had changed. Now they understood why. "We're expanding," she said calmly. "Atlanta is home base now. New projects, new purpose, same standards. Those who want to relocate, we'll support you. Those who stay in LA, you'll continue operations under Camille's leadership." There were questions, logistics, HR worries. She answered all of them without flinching. Because when you've walked in on betrayal and survived, no spreadsheet scares you. That weekend, she drove to Decatur for no reason other than to feel the city. She ate at a small vegan cafe, wrote in her journal, sketched ideas on napkins, and ordered a second juice she didn't finish. She wasn't looking for company, wasn't swiping on apps, wasn't trying to distract herself with noise. She was finally feeling herself again. Rooted, clear, unapologetically alone, and unafraid of that truth. When she returned to her apartment, she opened a blank page in her journal and wrote, "The name no longer fits. The woman I am now built this. I need something that reflects her." She stared at the sentence for a long time, then scratched it out, wrote one word in all caps below it, Cole. Not Cole Concepts, not Cole Development, just Cole. Her name, her story, nothing else needed. The next day, she officially filed a rebrand with the state. New name, new logo. Same woman, just no longer shrinking. The messages from Ellis slowed after she signed the lease. A single email, one line, "I'm sorry for how it ended." She didn't respond, not because she was cold, but because closure isn't something you beg for. It's something you build. The worst day came quietly. A random Wednesday. She had just finished measuring specs at the new office site when her assistant called with a soft voice. "Thought you'd want to know. Aminda gave birth this morning. It's a boy." Naria didn't speak. She didn't feel anger. She didn't feel heartbreak. She felt still. She sat in her car with the windows down, listening to the soft hum of Atlanta traffic, then whispered to herself, "That child didn't betray me. They did." She closed her eyes, and for the first time since it happened, she felt no heat in her chest, no weight on her ribs, just breath. The next morning, she woke up at 5 a.m., stretched, walked outside with her tea. The city was still asleep, but her peace? Wide awake. The first time Naria met Cairo Wells, it wasn't planned. It was 3 months into her new life, and she was presenting her Beltline development, pitched to a panel of private investors, most of whom looked barely interested, except him. Cairo sat at the end of the long oak table in a dark sweater, a clean notebook in front of him, and the quiet kind of presence that didn't demand attention but always got it. He didn't interrupt. He didn't scroll through his phone or whisper to his colleague. He just watched, like her words weren't background noise, like he was listening not just to what she said, but what she meant. When the pitch ended and questions opened, most asked about profit margins, projected occupancy, and competitive real estate rates. "Cairo," he asked about light. "Have you considered the sun orientation across units for seasonal heat management?" The room went silent. Naria blinked once, then smiled. "Yes, east-facing units for families, deeper set windows in the studios. We're also factoring tree growth to reduce direct exposure by year 5. He nodded once. That was it. No performative compliment, no networking handshake, just a knowing nod, like he saw her. And that was enough. She didn't expect to see him again. But 2 weeks later she was in Dallas, attending a design expo she almost skipped, and there he was, browsing an exhibit on reclaimed wood. Same calm energy, same focused eyes. This time, he approached her. "You're the architect with the Beltline project," he said, not asking. "And you're the man who asked about the sun." His laugh was low, unforced. "Cairo," he offered. "Naria." No job titles, no small talk. They walked through 2 exhibits without mentioning what they did or who they were connected to. Instead, they talked about material ethics, her thoughts on texture versus shape, his love for structures that didn't apologize for their function. It was the kind of conversation that didn't feel like flirting, and yet she felt seen, not desired, not studied, seen. Later that evening, at the hotel bar, they ran into each other again. He was alone. So was she. He didn't offer to buy her a drink, didn't slide closer or lean too far in. He just asked, "Mind if I sit?" And when she said yes, he sat, with space between them, like a man who knew respect wasn't a performance. They talked until the bar closed. Not once did he mention his net worth. She didn't mention Ellis, and when they said goodnight, there was no hug, no reach, just a pause, a look, the kind that said, "This doesn't have to be rushed to be real." Naraya didn't overthink it. She didn't replay every word or analyze the angle of his glance. She went back to Atlanta, back to her office, back to her work. But when Cairo emailed a week later asking if she'd like to walk the Beltline site with him, strictly as a design enthusiast, she said yes without hesitation, not because she was interested in romance, but because she didn't flinch when she saw his name. And that, for her, was new. On the day of the walk, Cairo arrived on time. No assistant, no driver, just him, in rolled sleeves and clean boots, ready to walk through dirt like it was a museum floor. He didn't ask personal questions, didn't bring up Dallas. He asked about her vision, where the light would fall, how sound would move, what she wanted the buildings to say without speaking. And she told him, every detail, every layer. Her heart poured into concrete, paint, and purpose. When they reached the end of the lot, he paused beside her, hands in his pockets. "You don't design for attention," he said. "You design for meaning." She didn't respond, but in her chest, something softened, because someone had finally said what she'd spent her whole career trying to prove. After their walk on the Beltline site, Cairo didn't text her the next morning. No follow-up. No, had a great time. No pressure. And strangely, Naraya appreciated that. He didn't hover, didn't try to slide into her life like a smooth operator. He gave her room. So when she thought about him later that week, it wasn't because he was pursuing her. It was because she'd finally exhaled around someone and realized she hadn't in months. Their next meeting happened over lunch. She invited him to a small spot near her new office. Nothing fancy, just good food, quiet seats, and a patio that let the light pour in. He was already waiting when she arrived. No suit, just a dark button-down and jeans. A notebook on the table, half filled. "You write by hand?" she asked, setting her bag down. "Only the ideas that matter." That line stayed with her all through lunch. He didn't rush the conversation, didn't dominate it. When she spoke, he listened. Not like someone waiting to respond, but like someone who'd carry her words home with him. She told him about her rebrand, how she let go of LA, how she was building something quieter but truer. She left out the part about Ellis, left out Aminda. She wasn't ready. But Cairo didn't push. He only said, "Atlanta fits you. You don't wear noise." That made her smile, because he saw her. Not the version she edited for work, not the woman shaped by betrayal. Her. Over the next few weeks, they crossed paths more often, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. Industry panels, site visits, coffee shops with overlapping calendars. They didn't make it a thing, but something was growing. And Naraya, though cautious, wasn't scared of it. One evening, after a shared meeting with a local urban revitalization board, they walked back toward the street together. The sun was setting behind the buildings. The air was thick with heat and jasmine. As they reached the corner, Cairo slowed his steps. "Do you want to walk a little farther?" She hesitated, then nodded. They kept walking, past murals, past stoops, past the old brick wall covered in vines where she once sketched in silence. When they reached a bench, he stopped. "You look different," he said softly. "From when?" "From when you first walked into that pitch meeting. You were pulled in, heavy. Now you look like you're letting the ground carry you again." Her breath caught. He wasn't trying to impress her. He was observing her, noticing things most people ignored. She sat down slowly. He joined her, but didn't inch too close. Instead, he waited, like he knew she had something to say. And she did. "I was married," she said finally. He wasn't who I thought. And she wasn't either. He didn't blink, didn't ask for names, didn't press. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. "Not everyone shares that kind of pain while it's still healing." She looked at him, a little stunned, then asked quietly, "Why aren't you afraid of messy?" Cairo smiled. "Because people who never make a mess don't usually build anything real." That moment opened something inside her. A soft shift, a lowering of the guard. They didn't kiss, not then, not even when they said goodnight. But as she walked back to her car, Naria felt something she hadn't in a long time. Safe. Not because she was protected, but because she was seen and still accepted. That night, she sat on her balcony with tea and her sketch pad, and she wrote in the corner of the page, "Cairo, gentle doesn't mean weak." Then she sketched. Nothing structured, just lines, curves, and a softness she hadn't drawn in years. The new office opened without a ribbon-cutting ceremony. No press, no announcement, no champagne bottles popping on Instagram. Just a quiet Monday morning. A handwritten sign on the glass door that said, "We're home." And Naria, standing in the middle of the raw space, barefoot, holding her coffee. With both hands, her eyes sweeping over beams and light and new beginnings. The walls weren't painted yet. The furniture was still in transit. But the space was hers. Not rented energy. Not borrowed titles. Not shared with a man who promised forever, but handed it to someone else. Hers. Camille flew in from LA to oversee the setup. Her second in command. Loyal. Sharp-tongued. Efficient. She raised a brow when she walked in. "You're smiling," she said. "Am I? With your whole face. It's confusing." Naria laughed for real, for the first time in a long time. Camille opened her tablet and got to work, while Naria moved between rooms, tapping the walls, testing the echo. She wasn't just designing space. She was creating air she could breathe again. The first project launched 2 weeks later. A local community center that needed redesign, not demolition. Most investors had passed on it, said it wasn't scalable, said the ROI was too low. Naria saw legacy where others saw limits. She brought Cairo in on the financing, quietly. No partnership announcements, no titles. They kept it clean. He handled the numbers. She handled the soul. They spent more time together. Site visits, meetings, silent rides through Atlanta's back streets. Still, Cairo never rushed anything. Not her story. Not her timeline. Not her boundaries. And that patience? It became a form of intimacy on its own. One night, after a long workday, they stood outside the site under dim yellow lights. Cairo looked over the foundation pour and said, "This part right here, this is what makes or breaks the rest. People always focus on the finish, the pretty. But if this step isn't solid, none of it lasts." Naria nodded slowly, then turned to him. "That's why I walked away." He didn't ask from where, but she continued anyway, because the finish looked beautiful. But the foundation, it had already cracked. Cairo didn't say, "I'm sorry," didn't offer cliches. He just nodded once, his voice low. "Then I'm glad you left before it collapsed on you." She wanted to kiss him. Right then, but she didn't. Not because she wasn't ready, but because something told her he'd wait until she was the one who reached for it first. And that made all the difference. The next few weeks moved fast. Furniture arrived. Her team settled into the new Atlanta office, and the city slowly opened its arms to her firm. No red carpet, but no resistance either. Clients came because of her work. They stayed because of her clarity. Naria no longer pitched herself. She presented. If they didn't see the value, she didn't try to convince them. It wasn't arrogance. It was peace. The kind that grows when you've had everything pulled from under you and realized you could still stand. Cairo became part of her rhythm. He never intruded. He offered, checked in, appeared, never uninvited. They met for coffee after site visits, walked the Beltline on early Saturday mornings before the city fully woke. Sometimes they sat in silence. Other times they talked for hours, but even the silence between them felt full. Not empty, not awkward, just full, like breathing next to someone who doesn't need to fix you. One Thursday night, she invited him to her apartment, not for anything romantic. She had picked up blueprints and Thai takeout, and she didn't want to eat alone. He showed up in a grey long sleeve and jeans, holding a brown paper bag with ginger lemonade and 2 cookies from a bakery she loved but hadn't mentioned. "How'd you know?" she asked. He shrugged. "I read what you reach for." That line made her pause. Because how many men had studied her without watching her? Ellis had memorized her schedule. Cairo memorized her comfort. There's a difference. They ate at her counter. No music. Just the quiet clink of takeout boxes and the occasional hum of the fridge. She unrolled the new community center plans, showed him the new accessibility features, the materials that cut costs without sacrificing warmth. He nodded, took it all in. "You're not designing for credit," he said. "You're designing for people who'll never say your name, but will feel your work every day." She blinked, set down her chopsticks, then whispered, "That's exactly it." He didn't respond, just held her gaze a moment longer than usual. Then he stood, cleared the boxes, and rinsed the dishes like he'd done it 100 times. No fanfare, no performance, just presence. When he finished, she handed him a towel to dry his hands. Their fingers brushed, briefly. Not enough to spark a moment, but enough for her to feel the question rise in her chest. Was she ready? For something real? For something still? For someone who didn't demand anything except honesty? She didn't answer out loud. She didn't have to, because as he stepped back, he smiled gently and said, "I'll let you sleep. Long day tomorrow. No ask to stay, no lingering look. Just respect." And when the door closed behind him, she leaned against it, closed her eyes. And for the first time since she left LA, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt trusted. That night, she pulled out her sketchpad and didn't draw a building. She drew a hand, palm open, no rings, no reach, just open. Then she wrote in the corner, "Stillness can hold love too." Have you ever met someone who didn't rush your healing, who didn't demand your story but made space for your truth? Have you ever felt safe in silence because someone finally saw you, not what you survived? If you've ever rebuilt yourself after betrayal, if you've ever found comfort in stillness, then this chapter was for you. Drop a comment if you believe respect is the real beginning of love. Tap like if you've ever had to start over with nothing but your name and your peace. And subscribe, because Naraya's journey is far from over. The next part, that's where love asks for more than silence. And she has to decide if she's ready to let it in. The call came in on a Monday. Naraya was seated at her new desk, finalizing supplier notes for the community center flooring, when Camille buzzed her line. "Client rep for the wellness build wants to move up the pitch by a week." "We'll adjust," Naraya replied. Also, Camille added, "Cairo Wells is in the lobby." That made her pause. Did he say why? Nope. But he's holding coffee and looks like patience in a button-down. She smiled. "Send him in." He stepped inside with a slow kind of confidence. No rush, no apology. He handed her a warm cup. "Almond milk, no sugar. You didn't answer your phone this weekend. Thought I'd check in, quietly." "I turned it off," she said, a little too quickly. "Needed space." He nodded like that, made perfect sense. That's allowed, especially for people who give so much during the week. There was no pressure in his tone, no guilt woven into his words, just awareness. That made her chest loosen. They sat across from each other, not speaking for the first few moments, but it wasn't awkward. It was natural. When he finally spoke, it wasn't small talk. "I don't want to assume anything, but I want to be clear. What I feel toward you isn't casual, it isn't temporary, but it's not something I'll force." Her hand froze on the sleeve of her mug. He continued, If you're not ready, say it. If you are, say it your way. She looked up at him, and for the first time, she said something she hadn't said in years. I'm scared of being known again. Not liked, not praised, known. Cairo didn't blink. Then we can take it slow. But I'll wait at the pace of your trust, not mine. It didn't sound like a line. It sounded like a promise. They didn't touch that day. But something inside her shifted, not toward romance, toward readiness, not as a date, as something unnamed. She wore soft grey slacks, a simple blouse, her curls down. No extra effort, no mask. He showed up in dark navy, sleeves rolled, collar open. Casual, but present. They ate slowly, talked gently. No hot questions, no heavy declarations. Just closeness. And when he walked her to her car, it wasn't a moment full of anticipation. It was full of quiet decision. Would it be okay, he asked, if I held your hand? She looked down at her fingers. Bare. Still. Slightly cold from the evening air. Then she reached for his. She didn't say yes. She just let him feel it. And in the way their palms fit, without a jolt, without hesitation, she understood something. Her hand hadn't been held in peace for years. They didn't kiss. Not that night, not the next. But that one simple touch, it lingered. On her walk upstairs, in her shower that night, even in her sketches the next morning, she kept drawing curved forms, arches, warm rounded corners, no hard edges. Cairo wasn't changing her. He was reminding her softness was still safe. It became a ritual after that. Every few days, Cairo would show up without warning, but always with intention. A midday coffee, a note slipped under her office door, a walk suggested when her schedule looked tight, but her shoulders looked tighter. He never demanded attention. He simply gave presence. That was the difference. Ellis had always given her performance, plans, grand gestures, control disguised as care. Cairo gave her space, and somehow, in that space, he became the only person she wanted near. One Thursday afternoon, they met for a sight walk. The community center was taking shape, beams in place, insulation going. New framing around the arched entrance she had personally redrawn. They walked side by side. No hard hats, no team, just them. You ever miss Ella? Cairo asked as they stepped through the future rec room. Sometimes, Naria answered honestly, but mostly, I miss who I thought I was there. You're more you now. She looked up at him. How would you know? Because I've watched you stop shrinking. The way he said it, like it wasn't a compliment, it was a fact. After the walkthrough, he invited her to his place. Not with pressure. There's a bottle of wine in my kitchen with no plans. You in? She paused, then nodded. I'm in. Cairo's apartment was in Midtown. Clean, simple, intentionally under-decorated. No bold art pieces, no showy furniture. Just bookshelves, quiet lighting, and the smell of citrus and something baked. She walked around slowly. You live like someone who knows himself, or like someone who's tired of clutter. He smiled. He poured the wine. They stood near the window. The city lights blinked beneath them, but the space between them was still. Not charged, not tense, just full of things unspoken. At one point, she set her glass down. Can I ask you something? Anything? Why haven't you kissed me yet? He studied her face, then said, because when I do, I want you to know it's not about the moment. It's about the day after. She blinked. Slowly. What if I'm not sure about the day after? Then, I'll wait. He said it without hesitation. And that made her lean in. Not because of the words, but because of the steadiness behind them. And when she kissed him, it wasn't a rush. It was release. Months of silence, of guarded touches, of questions without answers. All of it dissolved in the way his hand rose to cup her cheek, like she might break if he moved too fast. But she didn't break. She opened. They didn't sleep together that night. She stayed a little longer, sat on his couch, fell asleep beside him with her legs curled under a throw blanket, his shoulder beneath her cheek. When she woke up, his hand was still on her back, still, gentle, still there. She left before sunrise, not because she was running, but because she didn't need to prove anything to the morning light. He texted one word after she left, safe. She stared at it, smiled, saved it, not the message, the feeling, because that was the first time in years she'd left a man's space and still felt whole. Naraya didn't speak to anyone for the first 2 hours after she left Cairo's place. Not Camille, not her assistant, not the contractor waiting on material approvals. She made tea, sat on her balcony, and let herself feel something she hadn't let in for a long time. Ease. Not excitement, not fear, just ease. There was no post-date panic, no overthinking, no wondering if she'd said too much or not enough. Cairo hadn't asked her for anything. He hadn't tried to define what happened between them. And he hadn't followed up with demands. Just one word. Safe. And that word lived in her chest like a soft light. Later that afternoon, she went into the office and met with her design team. Nothing in her work had changed, but something in her had. She wasn't as sharp with her words. Not dull, but softer, more patient, more curious about how her team saw the project taking shape. She asked for feedback, listened longer, took in critiques without being defensive. And Camille noticed. "What's this new glow you're walking in with?" she asked over lunch. Naraya just smiled. "Good sleep." Camille raised an eyebrow. "Sleep got a name?" Naraya didn't answer. Didn't need to. The community center project passed zoning approval that week. It was a huge win, especially after months of pushback on whether the space was viable in that part of town. The moment the news hit her inbox, she closed her laptop, grabbed her phone, and texted Cairo. Zoning cleared. Phase 2 starts Monday. He replied within minutes. "Congratulations. You free for dinner tonight?" She stared at the message for a second, then typed, "Yes, come to me." He arrived that evening with takeout, a bottle of red wine, and a playlist that felt like a soft echo of her mood. They sat on the floor. No table, no television, just candlelight and laughter. When he leaned in to kiss her this time, she met him halfway. No hesitation, no slow build. She knew, and when he picked her up, quietly, easily, like he'd done it in a dream before, she let him. They made love the way two people do when nothing is being proven and nothing is being healed, only honored. It wasn't urgent, it was full. Like they were building something, not burning it down. Afterward, they lay tangled in her sheets, neither of them speaking for a long time. Then Cairo whispered, "I didn't come to fix anything. I know. I came because I don't want to miss what you're becoming." She didn't cry, but her hand found his on the blanket, and she held it like it was the only anchor she'd ever needed. Because sometimes the only thing more powerful than someone saving you is someone witnessing you while you save yourself. They woke up slowly the next morning. No alarms, no rushing off, just the warm quiet of two people who didn't need to fill the space between them with anything but presence. Cairo was already half-dressed, barefoot in the kitchen, pouring her tea into the mug she always used. She watched him from the bedroom doorway, leaning against the frame. He turned, noticed her gaze, and didn't say anything right away. He just handed her the cup, warm and full, and kissed her forehead. "You slept deep," he said. "I think it's the first time I wasn't holding anything in." He nodded. No follow-up, no questions, and that silence, that's what made her walk over, wrap her arms around his waist, and hold him for a long time. Not because she needed reassurance, but because she was ready to give it back. They didn't label anything that morning. No, "Are we something now? Or what are we doing?" Talks, just breakfast, music, comfort. Then, without a word, he picked up her sketchbook from the table and began flipping through it. She tensed slightly, not because she had anything to hide, but because her sketchbook wasn't business. It was personal, raw. He paused on one page, an outline of a hand, palm open. No caption, no name, but it was his. She had drawn it weeks ago, after their first long walk, after he rinsed her dishes and left her space undisturbed. "Is this me?" he asked gently. She nodded once. He didn't tease, didn't smirk, didn't ask for more. He just whispered, "It's one of the kindest drawings I've ever seen." Then he closed the book, set it down, and changed the subject, like he knew when not to press. That afternoon, they went to walk the community center site together. The sun was high. The crew had wrapped for the day. They strolled through the beams and outlines of walls, dusty and bare, and Naraya pointed out future. Classrooms, a flex performance space, and a garden that would bloom where concrete used to live. "This place feels like a second chance," she said. "For you?" "For all of us," she replied. "People who lost things. People who need something gentle but strong to walk into every day." Cairo touched her elbow softly. "You realize you're designing what you've become, right?" She tilted her head. "What's that?" "A structure with no facade, just integrity." Her throat tightened, not from sadness, from resonance, because she hadn't even seen herself that way. But he had. And sometimes it takes someone else's language to help you translate your own growth. They didn't kiss that day. They didn't need to, because the way he looked at her, the way he saw her, that was already intimacy. The message came from a mutual friend in LA, not Ellis, not Aminda. Just someone who still followed them both on social media and didn't know the full story. It was short, direct. Aminda had the baby, a boy, full name, Elias Monroe. Naraya read it twice, then a third time, not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Her hand didn't shake, her heart didn't speed up, her eyes didn't fill. She sat on her office couch, phone in her palm, breathing normally. No reaction, just stillness. Camille knocked a few minutes later, holding a coffee. "Your 3 o'clock pushed. You okay?" Naraya nodded. Aminda had her baby. Camille's jaw tightened. But she didn't speak, just walked over, set the coffee down, and stood silently beside her. "I don't feel anything," Naraya said aloud. "Shouldn't I?" Camille shrugged. "Maybe you already grieved what she took." And what he gave away. Naraya exhaled. That was it. The loss had already been buried. What was born now had nothing to do with her. Later that evening, she went home, poured a glass of water, and stood by her window. The Atlanta sky was painted with streaks of rose and gold. She thought of all the mornings she had prayed to be a mother. All the nights she'd cried quietly while Aminda rubbed her back, pretending to comfort her, while carrying the child she could never have. But instead of bitterness, all Naraya felt now was distance. Because healing doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it comes in the quiet, in the breath that doesn't shake, in the phone left unanswered, in the smile you give yourself in the mirror because you know you made it. She didn't tell Cairo immediately, not because she was hiding it, but because she didn't need to unload it. She wanted to meet him without a story, without past weight in her throat, and when she did see him 2 days later, she didn't even bring it up. They went for a late walk, stopped for ice cream, sat on a bench near a garden that was finally blooming in full. He handed her a napkin as melted caramel dripped down her wrist. "You've been quiet. That's not always bad," she smiled. "No, it's not. Stillness suits you." She looked at him, studied his jawline in the fading light. She had the baby. He didn't flinch, didn't press for more. "And you?" "I'm okay. I don't want him. I don't want her. I don't want their story. I don't want any of it back." She looked out across the lawn. "I just want this. What's now? What I've built. What's mine." Cairo leaned back against the bench. "Then I think that makes you the one who won." She didn't reply. She didn't have to, because peace doesn't shout. It settles in your bones. And that night, when she went to bed, she didn't dream of what was lost. She dreamed of what was waiting. The next morning, Naraya woke up before sunrise. Not from anxiety, not from unfinished work, just early light brushing through the curtains, the way her body had grown used to peace. She lay there for a moment, listening to nothing but her own breath, her fingers gently curled around the sheets. She didn't miss LA. She didn't miss what she thought love was supposed to look like, because this right here, this quiet, this clarity, was love in its purest form. No performance, no pressure. Later that morning she met Cairo at the Beltline site. They were reviewing landscaping plans and solar shading options. Things most investors skipped over, but Cairo always paid attention to. When she arrived, he was already there, standing near a group of contractors with a clipboard in hand and sleeves rolled up. He looked up, spotted her, and smiled. Not the kind of smile that asked anything from her. Just the kind that said, "I'm glad you're here." "You're early," she said. "So are you." "Habit," she replied. "I like watching things before they wake up." "Same," he said. "It's the only time a space tells the truth." They walked the perimeter together. No crowd, no titles, no one asking who they were to each other. And still, the way they moved, in sync, unspoken, answered the question before it could be asked. After the walkthrough, they sat on the steps of the new west entrance. The sky above them was washed in soft blue, and birds scattered from tree to tree like someone had paid them to perform. Cairo took off his watch and tucked it into his pocket. "Do you know what I like most about you?" he asked. She raised a brow. "You don't ask for attention. You command it without realizing." She gave him a soft look. "I used to ask for it, quietly, in ways I didn't know I was begging, but not anymore." "No, not anymore." He nodded, then leaned his shoulder into hers gently. "No grab, no pull. Just wait. Trust. Do you want to come over later?" she asked. "For no reason. Just, I want your voice in my space." He smiled. "Then I'll bring dinner." That night, he came with roasted vegetables, spiced salmon, and a bottle of wine she didn't expect him to remember from their very first lunch. They ate on her balcony. No plates, just parchment paper and fingers and laughter. And when she stood to go inside, he followed without asking. She took his hand, led him to her bed. And this time, they didn't move carefully. They moved like it was already theirs. When it was over, she lay on her side, fingers pressed against his chest, her breathing slow and full. "Do you want a child?" she asked softly. He looked at her, eyes steady. "I want whatever we're meant to build, whether it's life or just a life together." She didn't cry, but her chest opened in a way she didn't know it still needed to. "I don't know if I can. Not anymore. That doesn't change anything." He said it like a vow, like a man who had already decided, not to love her but to love her as. It was the city's annual Architecture and Design Summit, held in downtown Atlanta, at a converted library that now functioned as an art and ideas hub. Cole had been invited to present one of the keynote case studies, the Beltline Community Center, its design, philosophy, social impact, and construction model that prioritized sustainability and dignity equally. Naria didn't plan to attend the reception afterward. She wasn't a spotlight woman. She preferred boards over ballrooms, sketches over speeches. But Camille had signed them up anyway. "This city should know who built that space," she said, double-checking the RSVP list. "And they need to see your face next to the name." Naria sighed. "You sound like my mother." Camille grinned. "Then your mother had good instincts." She wore a black pantsuit with a satin edge. Clean, structured, no flash. Her curls were pinned back at the sides and her earrings were small. Gold studs passed down from her mother. When she walked into the summit space, heads turned. Not because she was the loudest, but because something about her carried weight. She didn't need to announce who she was. People could feel it. Cairo arrived just as she stepped off stage. She hadn't told him she was speaking. He stood in the back the entire time, arms folded, eyes on her, not her slides, not the crowd. Her. And when she saw him afterward, she didn't play it cool. She walked straight to him and wrapped her arms around his waist like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You came?" "Of course I did," he said into her hair. You make spaces for people. I needed to be here while you stood in yours. That night, at the after-reception, someone from the Monroe Group approached her. An executive. Clean smile. Sharp tone. A man who'd worked under Ellis during her LA years. He hadn't seen her since the divorce. "Neriah," he said, clearly surprised. "You look unrecognizable." "Good," she replied, holding her glass without blinking. "I saw your firm's rebrand. Bold move, dropping the concepts. Very minimalist." She smiled calmly. "Not minimalist, just intentional." He chuckled, shifting slightly. "Well, Ellis is back in the city next month. Maybe we'll all be in the same room again." She nodded once. "Doubt it." Then she turned, back to Cairo, back to the man who didn't need her history to know her worth. When they got home later that night, Cairo poured her a glass of water, kissed the side of her neck, and said, "You didn't flinch once tonight." She leaned back on the kitchen counter. "Because there's nothing left in me that fears being seen." That night, she slept deeper than she had in years. No dreams, no memories, no what-if questions spinning in the dark. Only stillness, only love that didn't ask her to shrink. A month later, the Beltline Community Center opened its doors. The ribbon cutting was small, just how Neriah requested. Local families, students, city leaders, and the builders who had poured their hands and hearts into the space. She stood back as the mayor gave a short speech. People clapped. Cameras clicked. But her eyes weren't on the stage. They were on the building, the way the morning light spilled into the glass entry, the curve of the doorway, the intentional flow between rooms that invited people to move, not just pass through. She didn't see a structure. She saw healing, hers and the community's, held in every line. When a child ran past her shouting in joy, Neriah smiled and whispered to herself, "This is the legacy, not marriage, not motherhood," meaning the kind no scandal could stain, the kind no betrayal could take. Cairo found her later, away from the crowd, seated on one of the benches she'd helped install. He didn't speak, just sat. After a long pause, he asked, "What's next?" She looked up. Expansion. A mentorship program. Possibly a design scholarship with HBCUs. "All brilliant," he said. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a folded piece of paper. She raised an eyebrow. What's this?" "A deed. Partial ownership." "To what?" "The next build." "Whatever you choose. You don't need me. But I want you to know, I'm not just showing up for now. I'm building into later." She stared at the document. No ring, no question. Just commitment in action. Not a proposal. A promise. Later that night, back in her apartment, she opened her sketchbook for what she thought might be the last page. She wrote, "They thought I lost everything, but I was only losing what wasn't mine to keep. What I kept, my name, my peace, my power." Then she drew something she'd never drawn before. A home, but not for her. A space for women, built with softness, strength, and safety. Underneath the sketch, she titled it in bold, "The Room She Built Herself." If you've ever been betrayed, silenced, or made to feel small, if someone took everything and expected you to break, let this story remind you, what's meant for you can't be stolen, and what leaves you may have freed you. Drop a comment if you've ever had to walk away just to find yourself. Tap like if peace became your greatest comeback. And subscribe, because at Mr. Charles Stories, we don't just tell stories, we build them, one truth at a time.